Title: She said she was going on a solo New Year's adventure. But when I checked her location, she was with her affair partner on a private beach. The new year was supposed to be a time of hope, fresh beginnings, and resolutions. But for Jason Carter, it started with an ache he couldn't explain. Jason, a 32-year-old graphic designer living in San Diego, California, had always considered himself a trusting partner. His relationship with Sarah Donovan, an adventurous 29-year-old travel blogger, seemed like the stuff of dreams. Sarah was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laughter, someone who thrived on spontaneity and the thrill of new experiences. Jason adored her free-spirited nature, even if it sometimes made him feel like he was struggling to keep up. But lately, things felt off. For weeks, Sarah had seemed distant, her phone buzzing late at night with notifications she'd dismiss with a quick swipe. She'd taken to stepping outside for hushed phone calls or suddenly forgetting to share details about her plans. Jason tried to brush it off as the stress of their busy lives, but the growing void between them was undeniable. Then, 2 days before New Year's Eve, Sarah made an announcement over their morning coffee. "I think I need to go on a solo adventure," she said, her tone light as though she were discussing the weather. She explained that she wanted to start the year with some introspection, to clear her mind and set personal goals for the future. The plan was simple. She'd rent a cozy mountain cabin in Lake Tahoe, California, for a few days of solitude. "It'll be good for both of us," she said with her signature warm smile, "a little time apart to recharge." Jason wanted to be supportive. After all, he prided himself on trusting her. But something about the way she avoided his gaze or quickly changed the subject when he asked for details about the cabin lingered in the back of his mind. When he suggested they ring in the new year together instead, she reached across the table and clasped his hand tightly. "Jason," she whispered, her voice dripping with sincerity, "this isn't about us. It's about me finding clarity. You understand, right?" He nodded, though the knot in his stomach said otherwise. When Sarah left that evening with a suitcase and an unusually curt goodbye, Jason stood at the door, watching her car disappear into the distance. The way she avoided looking back struck him as odd. A faint sense of detachment lingered in the air like a ghost. As he turned back into their quiet apartment, now filled with a strange emptiness, he couldn't shake the unease settling over him. Little did Jason know, Sarah wasn't heading toward Lake Tahoe at all. The first evening without Sarah felt heavier than Jason had anticipated. As he sat in their shared San Diego apartment, scrolling aimlessly through old photos of their happier moments, he tried to quiet the nagging thoughts in his mind. But the sense of unease persisted. Something about Sarah's demeanor before she left felt unnatural, forced even. She had been unusually vague about the cabin's details, dismissing his casual inquiries with short, rehearsed answers. Jason's mind wandered to the weeks leading up to her departure. He started piecing together the moments that now felt like glaring red flags. The late-night phone calls she would end abruptly when he entered the room. The excuses for why she was suddenly so busy during weekends. The way her once enthusiastic updates about her blog had dwindled to almost nothing. The most unsettling memory was from just a few days prior, when Jason had bumped into their mutual friend, Rachel, at the local grocery store. As they chatted, Rachel casually mentioned seeing Sarah shopping for swimsuits and sunscreen. She said she needed some new stuff for an upcoming trip, Rachel had said with a smile, not thinking much of it. Jason had nodded along, but confusion gnawed at him. Why would Sarah need swimsuits for a solo retreat in snowy Lake Tahoe? As the hours dragged on that night, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Against his better judgment, he decided to check the location-sharing app they had installed months ago for safety during Sarah's solo trips. He hesitated for a moment, feeling guilty for invading her privacy, but his growing doubt pushed him to open the app. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Sarah wasn't anywhere near Lake Tahoe. Her location showed she was hundreds of miles away, on the southern coast of California, at a remote beach resort near Laguna Beach. Jason stared at the blinking dot on his screen, his heart pounding in disbelief. Why would she lie about going to a cabin? And why was she at a beach resort, a place she had never mentioned in their conversations? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more painful than the last. Had she met someone there? Was this why she had been so distant? He wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but the pieces didn't add up. The Sarah he thought he knew, the one who cherished honesty and transparency, seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a stranger with secrets. Jason's hand shook as he closed the app. The thought of confronting her was too overwhelming at that moment. Instead, he resolved to find out the truth himself. He couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that Sarah's solo New Year's adventure was anything but what she had claimed. Jason couldn't sleep. The image of Sarah's location blinking on his phone screen haunted him, each pulse of the dot deepening his sense of betrayal. By the time the first rays of dawn spilled into the San Diego sky, he had made a decision. He needed answers, real answers, and the only way to get them was to go to the beach resort himself. The drive down the Pacific Coast Highway was surreal, a mixture of beauty and torment. The glittering ocean waves that usually brought Jason peace now seemed mocking, their calmness a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. With every mile he covered toward Laguna Beach, his mind raced with possibilities. Was Sarah meeting a client for her blog, visiting an old friend? But the memory of Rachel's comment about swimsuits and Sarah's recent behavior gnawed at him. Deep down, he knew the truth wasn't innocent. As he approached the resort, the tension became almost unbearable. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his thoughts spiraling into darker scenarios. What would he find? Would she even try to explain herself if he confronted her? Jason didn't know if he was ready for the answers, but he knew he couldn't ignore the questions any longer. Finally, he arrived. The exclusive resort's whitewashed walls gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the rhythmic crash of waves filled the air. Parking his car at a discreet distance, Jason walked toward the private beach area, his heart pounding like a war drum. And then he saw her. Sarah was lounging under a striped beach umbrella, her laughter carried by the breeze. She looked radiant, carefree, so much so that Jason almost forgot the betrayal that had brought him here. But it wasn't just her presence that struck him. It was the man sitting beside her. Tall, tanned, and shirtless, he leaned toward Sarah with an intimacy that was undeniable. The way his hand lingered on her arm, the way she leaned into him, it was clear they shared more than casual companionship. Jason felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He had spent years building a life with Sarah, trusting her, believing in her dreams, and now, with a single glance, it all came crashing down. His first instinct was to march toward them, demand an explanation, and let the world know the depth of his pain. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the fear of breaking down in front of her, or maybe it was the realization that she wasn't the person he thought she was. Instead, he reached for his phone. With shaking hands, he snapped a few photos of the scene, proof of her betrayal. Without saying a word, Jason turned and walked back to his car. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed heavily on his chest, but he knew this wasn't the time for confrontation. He needed space to process what he had seen, to decide what to do next. As he drove away from the resort, the waves crashing against the shore seemed louder, as if mocking the silence that now filled his heart. The days following Jason's painful discovery were a whirlwind of emotions. Every morning, he woke up with a heavy heart, the images of Sarah and her affair partner replaying in his mind like an unwanted movie. The shared apartment in San Diego, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and love, now felt like a cold, empty shell. Jason tried to maintain his routine, immersing himself in work and spending time with friends, but the gnawing suspicion lingered, refusing to be silenced. One crisp Saturday afternoon, unable to bear the silence any longer, Jason decided it was time to confront Sarah. He arrived home earlier than usual, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The familiar scent of her favorite lavender candle filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped him. Sarah was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her expression relaxed and unaware. "Sarah," Jason began, his voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk." She looked up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Jason took a deep breath, summoning all his courage. "I checked your location last New Year's Eve. You said you were going to Lake Tahoe, but the tracker shows you were at Laguna Beach. I even saw the photos you took there. Who were you with, Sarah?" For a moment, Sarah's face went blank. She hesitated, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest. "Jason? I can explain," she started, her voice wavering. "No, don't. I have all the evidence I need," Jason interrupted, holding up his phone to show her the photos he had taken. The undeniable proof of her betrayal was laid bare before her. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to the beach? Why lie about your trip?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm so sorry, Jason. I never meant to hurt you." "Never meant to hurt me?" "This wasn't just a little lie, Sarah. This was a complete betrayal of our trust," Jason replied, his voice breaking with emotion. He had always believed in the strength of their relationship, but now that foundation was shattered. After a long, painful silence, Sarah finally spoke. "I felt suffocated, Jason. Our relationship was beautiful, but sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed space to find myself, to understand what I truly wanted. When I met David, it just happened. I didn't plan it, and I never wanted to hurt you." Jason listened, his heart aching with each word. The confession was raw and painful, revealing the depths of Sarah's unhappiness and the reasons behind her actions. Yet despite the pain, there was a sense of relief in finally understanding the truth. In the days that followed, Jason grappled with a torrent of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and a lingering sense of betrayal. He spent countless hours reflecting on their relationship, trying to piece together where things had gone wrong. The realization that their bond was built on lies was a bitter pill to swallow, but it also ignited a spark of self-respect and determination within him. One evening, as the sun set over the San Diego skyline, Jason sat on their balcony, the cool breeze ruffling his hair. He looked out at the vast ocean, contemplating his next move. The pain of Sarah's betrayal was still fresh, but he knew he couldn't let it define him or his future. After much deliberation, Jason made a pivotal decision. He chose to prioritize his own well-being and self-respect over holding on to a relationship built on deceit. Forgiveness was an option, but it wasn't one he was ready to offer, not just yet. He needed time to heal, to rediscover himself outside the shadows of Sarah's lies. The following morning, Jason sat down with Sarah for one final conversation. "Sarah, I appreciate your honesty, but I can't continue this relationship. I need to move on and focus on myself. I hope you find the clarity you're seeking," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the underlying pain. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, Jason. I'm truly sorry." As Jason walked away from their apartment for the last time, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of liberation. He was ready to embrace a future free from deceit, determined to rebuild his life with honesty and integrity. As the new year dawned, Jason found himself standing alone on the same balcony where he had made his decision. The first sunrise of the year painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, symbolizing new beginnings and the promise of a brighter future. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was tempered by a newfound strength and clarity. Jason dedicated himself to personal growth, diving deeper into his work and reconnecting with friends and family who had always been his pillars of support. He also reignited his passion for graphic design, channeling his emotions into creative projects that brought him joy and fulfillment. Months later, Jason reflected on the tumultuous journey he had endured. The lessons learned from Sarah's betrayal had taught him the importance of self-respect, honesty, and the courage to walk away from what no longer served him. He realized that true love should never come at the cost of one's own happiness and well-being. One evening, as he walked along the shores of La Jolla Cove, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Jason felt a profound sense of peace. He had emerged from the darkness of deceit stronger and more resilient, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The betrayal had been a painful chapter, but it was also the catalyst for his personal transformation and the beginning of a new, empowered life. The start of the new year carried a bittersweet weight for Jason, a mix of lingering heartache and newfound clarity. Standing on the balcony of his new apartment overlooking the San Diego coastline, he watched the first rays of sunlight break over the horizon. The golden hues illuminated the path ahead, a symbolic reminder that every ending makes way for a new beginning. The betrayal he had endured was still a fresh wound, but it had become more than just a source of pain. It was a lesson. It had forced Jason to confront hard truths about trust, love, and the fragility of human relationships. He realized that trust, once shattered, couldn't be pieced back together overnight. It was a foundation that required honesty, commitment, and mutual respect, elements that had been absent in his relationship with Sarah for far too long. For weeks, Jason had been weighed down by the question of why. Why Sarah had chosen deceit, why their love hadn't been enough to keep them together. But as he stood there, bathed in the quiet serenity of the sunrise, he realized that dwelling on the past wouldn't change it. The betrayal had become a catalyst, pushing him to reevaluate his priorities and rediscover himself outside the confines of heartbreak. Jason made a silent vow to focus on his own growth and happiness in the year ahead. He would no longer define himself by Sarah's actions or the relationship that had crumbled under the weight of lies. Instead, he would pour his energy into the things that brought him joy and purpose, his work, his friendships, and the small moments of beauty that life offered. As he gazed out at the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a sense of liberation washed over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, it felt like his own. The scars of betrayal would remain, but they would also serve as reminders of his strength and resilience. Jason turned away from the balcony, ready to face the day and the year ahead. The journey wouldn't be easy, but he was no longer afraid. He had survived the pain of deceit and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to build a life defined by authenticity and self-respect. The sunrise marked the beginning of a new chapter, one free of deceit, full of potential, and entirely his own. Thank you for being a part of this story with me. If it moved you, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Narrative Stories. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet by subscribing. You're not just following channel. You're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.